Okay, so just to introduce Simone, I mean, you'll probably tell us more about you, but we know that you have been writing about Korea for a long time. You received your PhD in political science from the University of California, Santa Barbara, and teach at Northeastern University. Over 20 years of teaching and research experience, including serving as an associate in research at the Harvard University Korea Institute. Dr. Chun serves on the steering committee for the Alliance of Scholars Concerned About Korea and is a member of the Korea Policy Institute and the Korean Peace Network. She regularly contributes to various media outlets and has presented widely on inter-Korean relations. As a researcher and activist, Dr. Chun strives to create meaningful engagements between South Korean activists, scholars, and NGOs worldwide. And we are really honored that you are here with the New York, New Jersey Korea Peace Now Network. So welcome, everyone. Welcome, Simone. We are we're very interested to hear what you have to say about the Korean elections and how that affects our work.
Thanks so much for having me, and it's of course I love to see all of you and virtually, and especially Young. We had such fond memories when we went to as a Women Cross DMZ Peace Initiative in Seoul. So I'm so happy to see you now. It's a pleasure and honor to join New York and New Jersey Korea Peace Now. So I have prepared PowerPoint slides for my talk. So let me share my screen. Let's see. Can you see my, is my screen shared?
Yes.
Okay. Now, I actually probably will also see kind of two different slides, and because I did present on a similar topic on January for our peace activists in Boston, and I will use part of it as an introduction. Now, so the title of my, let me maybe cover here. Maybe what I will do is go slideshow mode. So the title of my talk is 2022 South Korean Presidential Elections, No Mandate for a Hawkish Pivot. And as probably we all know, the election outcome, the conservative candidate Yoon Suk-yeol won, to our great disappointment. In fact, when I was, was asked to give a talk, and my feeling was, as a lot of Koreans who have also been disappointed and depressed and such a setback, I almost felt like, oh, I don't want to even think about it. But there is an important, it's important to have accurate analysis of the situation. So I think this is not the time to give up, and rather it's actually the time to review and analyze more vigorously what have happened. So the order of my talk will be about as follows. First, I will talk about a Hawkish new president, Yoon Suk-yeol, and what I call the Washington consensus, meaning that Washington welcomed the conservative win. And my argument is that the outcome of election was rather razor thin margin, that is a 0.7% margin win, and which has been very, in my view, grossly misinterpreted by Washington consensus. as if it is a mandate for a hawkish policy. And second, I will look at following my argument, exploiting a razor-thin victory as a mandate for brinkmanship. There, I will look at how it's sort of it is a validity, so it's give a sort of a legitimacy for hardline policy. Third, I'll provide evidence that shows more votes for liberal and progressive parties, although the conservative won. Fourth, I will look at how the North Korean threat and the relationship between North Korean threat and the US anti-China machine, that is how the US anti-China machine is actually exploiting the North Korean threat. And fifth, I'll look at, in spite of this very a strong push for hawkish policy, in my view, there are some obstacles to implementing hardline policies. And sixth, I will look at, therefore, how it is important to contest the new hawkishness. Before 5 days before the election, March 9th election, I did write a short op-ed piece called the 2022 South Korean presidential election. At the time, of course, I was hoping for the victory of Democratic Party candidate, the Liberal Democratic Party candidate, Lee Jae-myung, who was a human rights lawyer, who has been a grassroots organizer and also very experienced politicians, very competent, knowledgeable, and progressive. And so my, at the time, obviously I was hoping for his victory. So the question that I raised was at the time, will Koreans choose pragmatism? Because at the time, the liberal candidate Lee Jae-myung, with regard to foreign policy, he was promoting more pragmatic and result-oriented engagement, as opposed to the conservative Yoon Suk-yeol, who is what I coined as a saber rattling. Now we also now we know the result, and so what was the result? Result was that it was conservative Yoon Suk-yeol's victory was about 0.7%, 0.7% victory. Now, and so this is one thing I want to point out is that a lot of images or slides that I'm going to use will have Korean. So no worries. I will translate and make it understandable. So this is Yoon Suk-yeol, the conservative candidate, and because he was a career prosecutor, and in fact he was prosecutor nominated and appointed by President Moon Jae-in, and his task was to reform the South Korea's most powerful prosecutor's office. And those of you who may be wondering what is about these prosecutors in South Korea's prosecutors, and it's the most powerful now emerging as a political interest groups, because they have both the very exclusive power of indictment and investigation. So, for instance, if I give you, let's suppose, Biden's attorney general somehow, had wanted to cause trouble for Biden, and he will go after all those, Biden's enemies. And then he will kind of try to help them for political purpose. So anyway, the Korea's prosecutors, Yoon Suk-yeol was a prosecutor general, and for the last 2 years or 3 years when he was a prosecutor, he pretty much went after most Moon Jae-in's progressive reform and Moon Jae-in's supporters and prominent politicians. And so he he led even as a prosecutor general, he led a very sort of anti-Moon Jae-in movement. And so anyways, that's his background. And there's Lee Jae-myung was obviously the one that I just mentioned as the Democratic Party's candidate. And there's the third one, it's a minor party, it's a progressive party. Sim Sang-jung was a female candidate. She got about 2.4%. Now, so that was the election outcome. Again, the main point being it was only the victory by 0.7%. So let's look at more closely, look at some of the data. Now, although Yoon Suk-yeol won, Conservative candidate won, if you put the total votes that Liberal Democratic Party, Lee Jae-myung, and the Progressive Party, Justice Party, Sim Sang-jung, if you put those together, they together got more votes. So more votes for Liberal and Progressive parties. Right. So what that means is, again, to give a sort of accurate understanding of the election outcome. So more Koreans voted for Liberal and Progressive parties than the Conservative Party that won. So Yoon Suk-yeol also, Conservative Party also won as a result of last-minute merger with another conservative, the An Chol-soo, who ran, but he quit last minute. So this was the outcome of the election. Now, this is again to look at, just to emphasize how close the election. It was the closest election in South Korean history. And again, you can see the image of the election result. Now, if you look at the next one is about that shows votes by age. Now, it's interesting that men under 30s, the conservative, those who voted for conservatives are male voters under age 30 and people over 60s. Those are strong conservatives. And women under 30s, they voted for Liberal Party. And also people between in the age 30s, 40s, and 50, they supported. So blue is the Democratic Liberal Party, right? So they voted. So this shows kind of again what was the characteristics of a Korean electorate. Interesting about kind of detail about women under 30. Here it's this has been, you can see the clear contrast between male voters and female voters. Male voters are very toward the conservative, and the women, young women voters are liberal. And the interesting point also is that the women in the 20s, women voted in the 20s, led at the last stage of election, their campaign, they led very kind of final, very strong push for Lee Jae-myung. So and also even after the election, right now, the very first group who's really campaigning very hard for progressive reforms are women in the 20s and 30s. So which I think for our group, it might be also interesting to look at. And this is another looking at the vote by region. So this is Korea. Unfortunately, only obviously South Korea. I wish we had election of unified Korea. That's maybe there will come someday. Now this part, the red is about the conservative, and also look at the blue is more liberal. And here we're looking at even in Seoul, you see here this kind of partial red. Very richest part in Seoul, called Gangnam, is like South Korea's Beverly Hills. 90% voted for conservative Yoon Suk-yeol because he's looked at as someone who's defending rich people's interest. And also this blue here about southwestern part. This is where you remember traditionally there has been, under especially previous authoritarian government, who has been repressed. You recall the 1980 Gwangju massacre, Gwangju People's Movement. So this year strong traditionally has been very liberal. The red part here, Southeast, this is actually my hometown here. It's a conservative, basically power base. They voted for 70%, over 70% voted for Yoon Suk-yeol. Now, looking at this outcome, so as I started by saying that I don't agree with the sort of mainstream media's analysis of the election. What happened is that the outcome was pretty much determined by a very sustained attack, reactionary attack on the progressive candlelight movement. For the last 2 years or more so, President Moon probably couldn't really do much. And also President Moon, he was a somewhat weak leader, although, as you know, he became president because of the great candlelight movement, which overthrew, which actually impeached his predecessor, Park Geun-hye. A third of Koreans participated in that candlelight movement. So there's enormous opportunity, momentum, but critics of President Moon, including myself, we looked at that this was a lost opportunity. And Moon's failure in implementing progressive reforms was the cause of the outcome of the election, in my view. Moreover, also, however, there is also public anger of rising very speculative housing prices, which we also can identify with it. A lot of people have that problem, and also other issues such as income inequality, youth unemployment, and also very divisive campaign that Yoon Suk-yeol, this conservative candidate, ran. He's sort of looked at as South Korea's Trump. So you can understand that what kind of person, what kind of campaign he ran. Misogynistic, very divisive, and hate-filled campaign that he ran. And there are two more important factors that explain the outcome of the election. That is, South Korea's 5 major corporate media all leaned toward conservative favorite. Now, so literally, Lee Jae-myung, the liberal candidate, his message could not go out, and he was, and media was the way it was lopsided sort of a reporting of the in favor of conservative. And another was the one that I just mentioned. South Korea's powerful, the new interest groups, politicized prosecutors who empowered, obviously, the Yoon Suk-yeol where he's come from. So these factors pretty much determine the outcome of the election. Now, so election is over. I'll look at next slide, how Koreans are not at all satisfied with the result. Now, here the Yoon's low approval ratings. Usually, so here looking at this one shows that the approval rating between President Moon and now President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol. So Yoon Suk-yeol's approval rating, so this is the red is Yoon Suk-yeol, the concern. His approval rating is lower than the outgoing President Moon. Usually this is a problem because if you look at this one, says a record low confidence in Yoon's ability to perform presidential duties. So in other words, the Koreans, they are not satisfied with the election result, nor do they have confidence in Yoon's ability to perform his duties successfully. Now, the Korean translation of this shows that people were asked about what they thought about Yoon's, Yoon's ability to perform. Like favorable rating was about 52.7. Now, what this means is compared with the previous president-elect, usually right after the election, the president-elect got approval rating of 70 to 80%. This was Lee Myung-bak. Park Geun-hye, the impeached Park Geun-hye she even got 64%. Moon Jae-in got approval rating 74% right after the election. But So Yoon Suk-yeol got about 52%. So this is not a obviously good sign for Yoon Suk-yeol. So as April 7th, the consensus among some of this progressive newspaper media is that a month of Yoon shows that he is following footsteps of failed former president. So in other words, this shows that Yoon Suk-yeol's his beginning is not so great. Nevertheless, we look at the Washington's response. Washington's response, here's an example. Op-ed, it's from Washington Post. South Korea's hawkish new president will be good for the Western alliance. Now, why will it be good? If you look at their argument, they said Yoon's victory will strengthen the US-South Korean alliance and coordination between Washington and Seoul to pursue containment policy. Containment policy means that pretty much anti-China policy. That you will see, therefore, as if this is a mandate for hawkish policy, there's op-ed from the Hill, time to reconstitute pressure on Pyongyang. And the way they looked at is, if you look at some of the details, Article 1, the op-ed said Yoon was justifiably viewed by many leading Korea watchers in the US as a more pro-US and anti-China candidate than his left-wing Lee Jae-myung. So you can see that this is the way that the Washington, some of the mainstream media and also Washington foreign policy elite and look at this candidate. And they will call, if you look at their language, they said the engagement policy, for instance, which Liberal Democratic Party support is called appeasement, and appeasement of North Korea. So therefore, the conclusion is the Yoon Suk-yeol's victory is welcomed. Moreover, it's very very dangerous sort of rhetoric. Some even, this is article that my good friends shared with me. If you read this article title says how Washington and Seoul can get on the same page to deter North Korea. In that article, if you look at it, they even suggest, the author suggests even some kind of US-South Korean joint military exercises include a scenario in which they explore the conditions under which the United States would decide with the South Korean input to use nuclear weapons against North Korea. So this is all, as you can see, very alarming. Again, to reiterate my point, the election outcome was not a mandate for hawkish policy, but this is the way they are going. Now, so let's look at what was as Yoon's hawkish rhetoric. As Christine Aunt pointed out, well, it's South Korea's new conservative president will likely set back peace and gender equality. Now let's look at what is Yoon's policy. He promotes very hawkish view that prioritizes almost exclusively broadening South Korea's military commitment to the US and subordination of Seoul to Washington's policy. Yoon designated North Korea as the main enemy, which previous liberal president stopped doing it. So this year, his president, South Korean president, officially designated North Korea as not the main enemy. Yoon Suk-yeol believed that she's a believer of CVID, what it called the complete, verifiable, irreversible dismantlement of a North Korean nuclear weapon. As you know, that policy, Christina also argued in this article, has failed for decades. Moreover, Yoon, during the campaign, he really went on to sort of McCarthyian red baiting against liberals, anti-communist, and also anti-China rhetoric. And moreover, he also called for preemptive strike against the North, although that would mean that nuclear war. Yoon also expressed his support for a U.S. ROK military, U.S. ROK Japan military alliance, even if that means that allowing Japanese troops and Japanese who colonized Korea for 35 years, and we still have those horrible memories. So even if that you're allowing Japanese troops in the Korean Peninsula, so it created a lot of controversy. And he also said that he would, his administration will purchase additional THAAD batteries. Although Biden and Moon administration implemented a policy decision says they don't need another THAAD battery in South Korea. 6 is enough. And last week during the visit to Washington, Yoon's advisors sought President-elect Yoon says he wants U.S. nuclear bombers and submarines to return. Now, so again, to reiterate my point, there's nothing, election was not a mandate for hawkish policy, but it is actually Yoon who is driving that policy, fueling that very hawkish policy. Hence, what we have is, as also Kristen An pointed out, and also many of us look at, is emboldening hardliners in Korea and the US. And it's going to be pivot, Yoon's victory is going to hawkish pivot in South Korea and away from engagement efforts under Moon. And moreover, Yoon will be more proactively, in my view, volunteer to join the anti-China bloc proposed by the United States. So to summarize the way I look at, the way I analyze the election. So what is it? The key point is that 0.7% victory margin is not a mandate for a hawkish pivot. They reflect the voters' anger at the failed progressive reforms. As I pointed out, more votes for liberals, progressive than conservatives. As I pointed out, about 50.3% votes for liberal and progressive parties, and 48% votes for the conservative party. And moreover, Yoon's hardline policies were not popular at all among Korean voters during the campaign. He was actually ridiculed. He's in my view, the most ignorant candidate that I have seen in many years. And also he's very also proud of being ignorant and very not at all prepared. So his foreign policy was, his views are very unpopular. And consistently, there has been very strong public support for inter-Korean engagement. But nevertheless, Yoon is pushing for his policies. Now, let me look at another factor that shows why the Koreas, in a way that we are looking at this, despite the Moon's peace initiative, we are kind of going backward. Here, the data that you're looking at is South Korea emerging itself as major export of weapons. And you can see there, South Korea's after United States, Russia, France, Germany, China, UK, Spain. So it's not a small country, it's a helpless country, but it is becoming a major country that has a military industrial complex. So this is also another driving force that also explains why the peace initiative, there was a setback in peace initiative. Why, regardless who becomes the president, we are seeing this more greater sort of obstacles for implementing inter-Korean agreement or other related peace initiative. So another looking at here is also projected increase in South Korean national defense budget. As you can see, under Moon, interestingly, while Moon was implementing those Moon's peace initiative, actually there is a dramatic increase in national defense budget, and is likely to increase more. So in other words, this also shows another factor that kind of add tension in the Korean Peninsula. As you already know that South Korea already has the sixth largest conventional army. And if you compare that with North Korea is about 30th. So this also kind of explain why, this data explain why Moon's also, in a way, Moon's peace initiative, it was contradictory and why it failed. And this graph shows public perception of Moon's North Korea policy. There's this dramatic increase, what people thought of Moon's North Korea policy. But you can see the gradual sort of declining. What it shows that people are being disappointed at Moon's failure in implementing inter-Korean agreements, and also his sort of rather subordinating policies to the United States. And during this time, as you remember, North Korea has kept its word to some extent. North Korea has kept its sort of self-moratorium on testing nukes and ICBMs until this month. 2019, Kim Jong-un even proposed in the New Year address, he said, unconditional reopening of Mount Kumgang, and also Kaesong Industrial Complex. The Kaesong Industrial Complex is the inter-Korean, very successful inter-Korean economic initiative, which previous Park Geun-hye government shut down. But there's no response from South Korea, and continuing to subordinate to the United States. Now, so what else can we add? Now, here's the relationship between North Korean threat and U.S. anti-China policy. Now, so you may wonder, so what is this, almost like 7 decades of North Korean threat, especially it's in very dominance in the U.S. media and also U.S. policymakers. One argument which, many of us agree is that U.S.-China tensions feed into tensions in the Korean Peninsula. I think that Gregory mentioned, point out this very clearly. And this is also the second point, is also something Greg said, the North Korean threat sells well to the American people. And this also North Korean threat, which United States needs for its 7 years of containment policy. Now it's a new U.S. anti-China policy. It also is used by Korean conservatives. So Noam Chomsky, which stated, the North Korean threat provides justification for the right-wing regime in the South. Relaxation with North Korea would mean conservative losing power. So this was based on the interview that I had actually a while ago. It was 2000, I believe, 17. And so in other words, there's a sort of collusion of interest, shared interest between conservative in South Korea and Washington's foreign policy lead. So to recap, South Korean election was a razor thin, it was not a mandate, but it has been exploited as a mandate for hawkish policies, and it's welcome. Now, that being said, my own prediction is that it's going to be hard to implement that policies. Now, here is, before I move on to that part, this just to show example of how North Korea is misrepresented. This is a very recent, just last week, article. Now, Kim Yo-jong said that, in response to pointing out, in reaction to the very bellicose statement made by Moon's NSA, saying that how in response to North Korea's latest ICBM test, South Korea is going to show its capability to strike North. And so Kim Yo-jong said that in response to this, and also indirectly referring to Yoon Suk-yeol's preemptive strike threat, Kim Yo-jong said, "We are not going to fire even a single bullet towards South Korea unless South Korea attacks us." So that's what she said. So but the same statement is reported. If you look at this, an example, Telegraph said that Kim Jong-un's sister warns North Korea could eliminate the South with the nuclear weapons. So this is sort of give an example of how the way North Korea is portrayed in the Western media, and to fuel that sort of image as a mad country and posing a threat. Now, so as I mentioned a minute ago, I think that there are obstacles though to the hawkish pivot. The one is Yoon's policy has been so kind of summarized as two no's and one yes. That means no to North Korea, no to China, and yes, big yes to U.S. position. Now, I think this is going to be although that's the rhetoric, it's very politically popular among some conservative, but it's going to be very difficult to implement. And for the obvious reason, South Korea is South Korea is a major trading partner. You cannot alienate, nor can you confront China militarily. So it's almost impossible. So that this Yoon's rhetoric, no to North Korea, no to China, yes to U.S. position, is not going to be easy to implement. Secondly, majority of South Korean support for a balanced stance on U.S.-China competition. Yes, there is sort of a rising sort of negative perception about China among Koreans. But Koreans, if you look at it, they're very pragmatic. They want a balanced position. I'll show you this opinion survey to prove it. And Yoon's hawkish pivot and also Washington's hawkish pivot also will fail because they're focusing on the denuclearization, complete CVID strategy, which has been failed in the past. And if he's going to insist on that, it's also going to fail. And the last point, another obstacle will be China and Russia are increasingly against this Biden's anti-China, anti-Russia policy because of that. So Russia and China are less likely to cooperate with the United States with regard to sanctions. We have already seen that's happening. Now, let's look at give you some of those data that supports my argument about why this Yoon's also Washington anti-China policy, hawkish policies are not going to be easy to implement and successful. This shows that South Koreans prefer balanced diplomacy. Now, what it shows that the one here on top, the majority of Koreans, they said that they prefer, with regard to the U.S. and China competition, they want a balanced diplomacy. They don't want to go to the way Yoon proposed, very strong pro-U.S. So that is, again, it shows Yoon Suk-yeol's position is not shared by majority of Americans, no, majority of Koreans. Although you can see that there's a gradual sort of increase in strength in people who support strengthening ROK-US alliance. That is also a fact. That is true. Now, another you can see is that why anti-China policy is not going to work for the money, economic reason. China is the big number one trading partner for South Korea. and United States come very distant second. So for that reason, it's the Yoon's insisting on the Yoon's anti-China policy is going to probably leave us as a rhetoric. It's going to be hard to implement. And also there's also other issues there, such as backlash against any retaliation from China. And so that's another possibility. Now, as I mentioned earlier, yes, there are a lot of sort of negative among Koreans and unfavorable, perception of China is definitely rising. But nevertheless, when you really look into the, reality, majority of Koreans believe China and South Korea can benefit each other economically. So that's, this is the first issue. So they have a mutual interest, not the way the United States wants South Korea, right, to have anti-China perception. And of course, but they look at a competitor. Right? There's a market opportunity, etc. And how about South Korea, the way South Korea look at US global leadership? What you look at is here, you can see that the South Korea, US global leadership is important, is decreasing. So South Koreans now believe that US is obviously not only South Korean, but also we also believe the US is definitely diminishing as a global leader. What else? Again, to reiterate my point about the South, the way, no matter how strongly Yoon tried to push with his anti-China agenda, or how the United States wants Koreans to be anti-China and become pro-US bloc, the Koreans, their perception are not going to go along with that. Another South Korean sentiment toward participation in US-led global world order. This is kind of interesting. I wish I could go more about this, but later, maybe another time. The interesting point is that how the younger South Koreans increasingly disagree with participating in the US world order, in which especially it is young people. If there's any military conflict, young people who's going to have to, who's going to sacrifice. So there's less support for that. Again, to show the way mass media, corporate media, and also all the Washington foreign policy elite present or wanted to understand where South Koreans stands with regard to US and China competition, as you have a very different picture here. In contrast, this is so the majority of South Koreans optimistic about inter-Korean relationship. This is data in 2021, just last year. It was data from the Koreans, the Democratic and Unification Committee. So this shows that what they thought about inter-Korean relations is going to get better or just stay the same. So majority of people, this is means that will be improved. The status quo. This means that people thought that's going to get worse. So if you can put together majority of Koreans, in spite of what happened in December 2021, they feel kind of optimistic about inter-Korean relationship. So that's what Koreans think. And majority of South Koreans do not regard the North as an enemy. So this is the Koreans, they were asked about whether North Korea is a partner for cooperation and support, aid. This is what majority Koreans viewed North Korea as, not as enemies. It's a nation that we need to help and cooperate, not an enemy. This is again shown. And majority of South Koreans approve of inter-Korean engagement. This one says 67.8% says end of war declaration is necessary. Nevertheless, interestingly, this is again 2021 survey. 54% of Korean thought that U.S. North Korean talk are not likely to resume anytime soon. So kind of pessimistic about US-North Korean relations. Now, 60.9% Koreans support relaxing sanctions. And they also support helping North Korea with the COVID, vaccine and food aid, and helping pregnant women and elderly, etc. Again, this is the way Koreans think about inter-Korean engagement. And majority of South Koreans approve of inter-Korean engagement. 74% support helping North Korea with the corona vaccine, COVID vaccine. Majority of South Koreans want peace with the North. This one says South Korean public opinion regarding a peace agreement to end the Korean War. Strongly support, 55.5%. 78.7% support the peace with the North. So that's about data of 2021. So the next one I'm looking at is actually rather recent article. It's article last week, I believe. Do South Koreans support a peace treaty with the North? This is an article research from Professor Timothy Rich. And he did, according to his survey, shows the majority of Koreans approve of the idea, interestingly, even among supporters of President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol. To me, that's very interesting. But let's look at the way he summarized his research findings, that despite recent missile tests by North Korea and the lack of meaningful inter-Korean dialogue, a clear majority of South Koreans approve of the idea. Even among those who had the plan to vote for Yoon Suk-yeol, the conservative presidential candidate, now president-elect, a thin majority support a peace treaty. In contrast to Yoon's rhetoric about tougher stance toward North Korea and the expectation that his administration will not continue President Moon Jae-in's call for a peace treaty without first denuclearization efforts by Pyongyang. So this is article up on April 6th. It's rather recent. Now, nevertheless, if you look at that article, Professor Rich also pointed out that probably Koreans support caveat is that instead of thinking this is sort of a realistic possibility, but Koreans thinking more, overall, so to somewhat abstract, a sort of wish that they support. So it's important to, have that caveat. So this is from Professor Rich's research. Majority of South Koreans want a peace treaty with the North. Now here, this is so overall about 70%. Lee Jae-myung supporters, Democratic Party supporters, more than 90% supports peace treaty with the North. With Yoon Suk-yeol's, about close to 50%, Yoon Suk-yeol supporters also support the peace treaty. Majority of South Koreans want a peace treaty with the North. The question he asked was, do you support a peace treaty with the those who are very progressive, 90%. So even the most conservative here, the most conservative voters, among them, almost 30% said they support peace treaty. Now, so what do we have here is bipartisan majority Korean support for peace. So that's the way I think I would interpret. Now, so what I think is that it is important data. Again, you won't see this kind of data, playing on CNN or even other media often. This is what Koreans think. So what this is a mandate. If you ask me if this is a mandate, people's mandate, not the mandate exploited by Washington's foreign policy elite and also the South Korean minority hawkish, the conservative. So it's important for us to amplify this fact. Hence, I hear because I mentioned earlier why there is despite that there are strong push for a hawkish policy, because of those geopolitical factors, Yoon Suk-yeol's and the Washington elite hawkish policy are not going to be so easy to implement. And because Korean voters support peace, and the real mandate is, again, there's very strong undercurrent among Koreans that for yearning for peace and almost bipartisan support. So that raises the question. I think this is Gregory's excellent article that he published about at the time, thinking about the upcoming South Korean election. I think this was at the end of his article. I agree very much. Progressives in South Korea face a twofold struggle in the month ahead, pressing their government to improve inter-Korean relations. This is an important point because even Moon, there was great opportunities, but the opportunities that have not been exploited. Now, President Moon could have pursued those inter-Korean cooperation, and a lot of them were even had nothing to do with the sanction, but he chose not to. So it's important. And blocking being dragged into the U.S. and anti-China military mission. So it's twofold struggle. At the heart of both issues, I think the excellent point that Greg makes is the resistance to U.S. encroachment upon South Korean sovereignty. It will not be an easy struggle, but it is a necessary one. And I think I agree with his point. So here's even the most, the important evidence of South Korea not having sovereignty. South Korea does not even, as we all know now, does not even have, operational, conduct to war, right? OPCON. Now, so how should we resist the hawkish pivot, especially when this is not at all what people want, not a mandate. It's being kind of exploited and being sold to the people, and it's very difficult next 5 years because we have the most hawkish president in South Korea, and the U.S. is all supporting him. So it's for the movement side, it's going to be really most toughest next 5 years. So how can we resist? First, I think there has to support pragmatic and result-oriented approach toward détente. Détente means détente with North Korea, with China. De-escalation with the North and China. And United Liberal Progressive Front. I said that United Liberal Progressive, this is more referring to South Korean election outcome. As you saw, there was, if let's say that the minor Progressive Party, Justice Party, merged with the Liberal Party, we would have actually Lee Jae-myung, the Liberal president-elect, right now. But so there was, that unity didn't happen, and that's another story. Probably later, maybe I can address that in Q&A. So anyway, you need the United Liberal Progressive Front because there are potentials. In other words, this is in the past South Korean. There is a. I'll put it this way: this is the first time that the Liberal Progressive have had more votes than the Conservative, so they don't have to actually compromise with the Conservative, so they can do their own unified front. That's where opportunity lies. And expansion of solidarity with other peace groups. So within the United States, I think that our, my good friend and also, brilliant scholar, Tim Bill, based in New Zealand, and also Greg and all others, we pointed out that, still South Korea issue, peace issue is not really made in the mainstream America's consciousness. So it's still very kind of minor, we are minority. So we need our allies. So it means expanding solidarity, which I think that our group, your group is doing heroically. And also to resist a hawkish pivot, we have to win this information war. This is also an idea that also I got from my good friend. And because as I just pointed out, tried to do in this talk, there is so much misinformation and brainwashing, propaganda, manufacturing of consent. So it's very important to have accurate analysis of the reality and the situation. Now, so let's look at this as a part of contesting that pivot to hawkish pivot. I think with this we already know, and many of us already participated. There's a call for suspending U.S. ROK military exercises, decreasing military tensions on the Korean Peninsula. Now, the joint military exercise will be happening this month. Now, that, as we know, that is not at all military exercises. The exercise itself is a cause for raising tension. It also includes decapitation of North Korean leadership. North Korea has opposed justifiably, and so this is I think they're going to go ahead with the drill, but still, I think we should strongly, vigorously oppose it. This is the pictures of anti-Yun protest. In other words, anti-Yun protests already started. I would say candlelight movement to check Yoon Suk-yeol's any draconian or authoritarian or repressive hawkish policies. They already start, people are already mobilizing it to contest that. And this is an image of young women in South Korea. It says Sunjae Taegyeol. It means she is protesting against Yoon's bellicose rhetoric about preemptive strike against. It says basically what the hell are you talking about? Why preemptive strike? Now you can also see that as I think I mentioned in the beginning of my talk, women in the 20s and 30s, young women are becoming the most interesting and progressive, sort of pushing a progressive reform. So here is, and they're very creative. You can look at her costume. This is the traditional, and she said war exercises. So she says that I'm going to catch those people who were warmongers, right? I'll be the ghost. And so they're going to have a press conference. Looks like today, actually, in South Korea time. And this is continuing this is the entire plan. This is a protest against war and defend peace against joint U.S.-South Korea war game. So there is going to be press conference in front of U.S. Embassy today in South Korea time. April 16, there's going to be candlelight in front of U.S. Embassy. April 24th, there's going to be a march in front of the Yongsan's South Korean defense compound. By the way, you probably heard that the controversy where President-elect not going to go to Blue House. He said he's going to move his presidential office to this Yongsan defense compound. It's becoming major controversy. And April 13th to 28th, in front of U.S. Embassy, there's going to be every day, there's going to be one-person speech and protest. So it's going to be all broadcast live, YouTube broadcast. As again, young women. And this is Korea Peace Appeal. I think we are very familiar with that we've been doing. And more, in other words, what I'm trying to show is that grassroots peace movement in South Korea they're alive, vibrant, but there's no report. This shows that women work for peace. I think Ayoung and I think we participated in 2018. It says 2022 Women Peace Walk. So they are going to have this several months of peace walk starting from April all the way to November, starting from Jeolla, southwest, south and southeast, Chungcheong, etc., and all the way to DMZ. And so they're going to finish in their walk in DMZ, Gangwon, in November. So this is the peace walk from April 13th through April 28th. It shows that shows that, you know, what you can do. It says it's very creative, you know, so you're going to give a speech. 7 reasons why, you know, why you should stop. There shouldn't be any joint war game. And this one shows, you know, you can sing, right? Sing song to protest against the war. And then, you know, this dance, and then speech in English against war, etc., 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 right? There's also speech contest. And then this one says, you know, how to punish United States if they insist on doing that exercise, and to urge that, you know, South government should implement, right, those inter-Korean agreements and making peaceful one Korea, etc. So it's going to be all, you know, broadcast YouTube live and etc. And another actually very important one. This is a Korean Metal Workers Confederation Union. This is the most powerful, most I would say the strongest union. They said that they already have declared war on Yoon Suk-yeol's anti-workers policy. In addition to being hawkish policy on the issue of peace and war, Yoon Suk-yeol has proposed the most ultra-conservative neoliberal economic agenda. It says that South Korea should reform its minimum wage law. People should be able to work more than 120 hours a week. So, he thinks that he also designated the Korean Confederation of Trade Union, KCTU, as the union. He actually identified as a union that he's going to be very tough on it. So because of that, and also in the meantime, Yoon Suk-yeol has said he's going to be all pro business oriented, pro cooperation, no surprise. So this is March 25th. You probably remember, right? Cheonggye, the downtown Seoul. They had a rally and they declare war on Yoon Suk-yeol's anti-labor policy. So they're going to contest. As you recall, what brought down Park Geun-hye's, what led to Park Geun-hye's impeachment, I don't know if you remember, was actually, it was the major nationwide rally organized by Korean KCTU, Korean Confederation Trade Union. So it was a workers' movement, right? And so this is very important development. And this one says, president's duty is to build peace on the Korean Peninsula. That is his job, right? This is protest. So going back to reiterate, resisting, I think it's important to resist a hawkish pivot through supporting those pressuring policymakers and pragmatic and result-oriented approach toward that time. In fact, China last week, apparently it was reported that they're proposing the U.S. should halt join the military exercise with South Korea, and then in exchange, North Korea stop testing ICBM, also nuclear weapons testing in the future. But this probably United States will not accept such a proposal. I think that Greg mentioned, you know, China will continue to propose this, but probably United States is not going to agree with China. So but nevertheless, China is, you know, it's important. China's cooperation is important because China has the kind of higher channel that with the North that neither Seoul or nor Washington has. So it's important to work with China. So it's, I think the first step, although it may not lead to denuclearization, but it still jumpstart diplomacy and bring North Korea to negotiating table. So that is where what I mean by pragmatic and result-oriented approach. And de-escalate with escalation with the North and China. As I also mentioned, United Liberal Progressive Front on the Korean side. And for our side, expanding solidarity with the other peace groups and prevailing in information war, which I hope that my talk is aiming at. I think that concludes my talk. And to conclude, to sum up, I think without vigorous resistance, the transnational, I'm going to actually go, without vigorous resistance, I actually, I have Hyun Lee's, I'm thinking of Hyun Lee, but if I have the picture, I thought that I may just cry. So without vigorous resistance, the transnational coalition of hardliners will force South Korea to serve as frontline to fight on behalf of the US new Cold War. It will maintain a state of tension in the Korean Peninsula for the US to justify its hold over South Korea, which this is, I'm quoting actually Tim Bill, our eminent scholar based in New Zealand, and secure its forward military position in Asia against China and North Korea. The razor-thin victory for the conservatives in the Korean presidential election was not a mandate for anti-North Korea and anti-China policy, but it was a mandate for detente and peace settlement on the Korean Peninsula. Now, so I'm thinking, you already saw Hyun Lee's. I think what I'm thinking is, if I say this, especially this it's very darkest moment, as we defeat, electoral defeat, and also thinking about next difficult 5 years. Many of us probably will feel like we, it might even want to just, not paying attention to or indifferent, or some people say they're gonna just not even gonna read news, gonna wait for 5 years, but that's not gonna help. So I think I'm thinking, because you already saw Hyun Lee's slide, Hyun Lee's picture, I'm thinking, something that our great friend, brilliant activist, great mind, should have said, just, one more push. I remember whenever she was, doing that all activist work, she always said, one last push, don't give up. So I will end my talk with thinking of Hyun Lee, and we miss her so much. And that's it. And I will stop sharing.
Thank you.
Oh, one thing here says I have actually Korean. This is I'm just quoting of the very famous protest song, which during Gwangju uprising, people's uprising in 1980, the times of Gwangju massacre. So it means that, those people who are still alive, you follow, although many people have passed away, or, passed away without, seeing the, dream of a peaceful, unified country. So that is the translation. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
I'm going to just stop the recording